Would you be able to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your role and the type of young people that you work with?
So my name's Alicia, and I guess my official job title is Youth Justice Recovery Worker. In a nutshell, what that means is I support people through addiction and people who may use substances for as long as they're open to the youth justice service.
What's the most common issues you see in young offenders when it comes to drug or alcohol use?
I feel like the most common issues are the facts that usually their substance use is a result of a whole range of other factors, and actually if they don't have the support to address the other factors, it's really difficult to support them through their substance use. For example, a lot of the people that I work with have neurodiversity, so most of them have ADHD and or autism. They might also be in care. I work with a lot of people in care, and to begin to ask someone to address their substance use when they don't have all the other kind of like core factors in place makes it really difficult sometimes to support them through no fault of their own, just because it kind of needs to be a holistic group approach to their substance use.
How early do you see an addiction or dependency start with some of these young kids?
It depends. Like, for example, with cannabis, I work with people as young as like 11 and 12 who will be addicted to cannabis. They may not even recognise it as an addiction, but it's not until you have that conversation, begin to unpick that with them, that they realise. So I might start working with them and they'll say, yeah, I just smoke. I say, how often do you smoke? Oh, a couple times a day. And I say, oh, do you do that every day? Yeah, but I'm not addicted. But they don't realise that it's even an addiction until they have someone sit down with them and actually unpack that with them. For, I guess, like harder substances, it is a bit later, but bearing in mind I work with under 18, it's still quite early. So for example, with like ketamine and cocaine, I work with people as young as 13, 14 who are struggling with addiction, with ketamine, cocaine, sometimes ecstasy. So usually it's quite young, but usually if they're younger, it's for cannabis.
From your experience, what tends to lead young children down the path of substance use?
So as I mentioned before, I do not think it's a coincidence that most of the people I work with are either in care or have ADHD or autism. That makes up 90% of my caseload, and I think that it shows that they contribute or make people more vulnerable to addiction. I rarely work with someone, in fact I've never worked with someone who comes from a two-parent household, who has a stable background, who is in education and is open to the Youth Justice Service and CGL. So I think what that shows is that there's actually a range of factors that contribute to someone's addiction or substance use. A lot of people also have mental health problems, so usually they're also open to a mental health professional. And that's why I say that you can't really support someone alone. Like, you really do have to work with their entire professional network if you want them to make meaningful change.
How does social media and online culture influence their attitudes towards drugs?
I think that social media makes it more difficult for people to recognise their substance use as a problem. And it's not until they recognise it as a problem that they can begin to change. For example, especially with the younger people I work with and cannabis use, they may smoke every day, but because it's in all the songs that they listen to, because all their friends do it, it almost serves as like a status symbol, where they're not seen as cool or they're not regarded as highly if they don't take part in these, and like that substance taking behaviour. Because they're getting what they seek from it, so because they are getting that validation, they really struggle to see it as a problem, because it is meeting their needs or what they think their needs are at that time. And so, yeah, I guess it's almost sometimes feel like it's you against social media trying to support them through their substance use.
There's been a noticeable rise in ketamine use under the age of 18 across the UK. What are you seeing from your position?
I completely agree. I feel like before, or historically, ketamine use has been usually recreational. Usually people don't tend to get addicted to it. And there was no kind of like long-term physical health effects, whereas what we're seeing way, way, way more now is prolonged addiction with ketamine, serious impacts on physical health like bladder issues, ketamine cramps, and more people being admitted to rehab for their ketamine use. Additionally, those kinds of things that we're seeing are more prevalent in I was going to say under 18s, maybe more like under 25s. When you compare it to adult service, it tends to be more substances like heroin or crack cocaine. So I think in summary, we're seeing addiction earlier and more severe addiction, more severe consequences from the addiction.
And why do you think it's got so popular over recent years?
I actually don't know why I think it's got really popular. Obviously, ketamine's really cheap compared to other drugs. But also I think it's more like people tend to start taking it in a party setting. And when I speak to people and the people that I work with, their ketamine addiction starts from using it recreationally and then it increases by that way. But I'm actually not sure why I think it's increased in recent years.
Do you think these children actually understand the dangers ketamine possesses? Could you explain some of those dangers, and have you got any first-hand stories?
I think at first, initially, they don't understand the full consequences of what ketamine can actually be like. And at first, she's very much in a party setting, very recreationally, and it is fun. So they don't see those effects. It's not until they notice that use becomes a bit more problematic, and it starts really gradual. So it will be first that they just might use it on a couple nights out, and then it will be, well, they can't go on a night out without that substance. And then it will be, well, they're using it daily alone. That's when you get the problems like the issues with the bladder, the ket cramps, the nasal issues. So a lot of people have holes at the back of their nose from where they use ketamine so much. They have collapsed nasal passages and struggle with breathing properly. I think as well, some of the other problems with ketamine use, and especially in my experience, is that you can't medicate for ketamine. So with a lot of other substances, we can give the psychosocial side of things and give them support that way, but also we can say, well, here's a medication that will make it so you don't want to use alcohol. Here's a medication that will replace your heroin. But with ketamine, there isn't that. So it purely is just a mental challenge almost. With the problems that we're seeing with like bladder issues, those damages are irreversible. And unfortunately, most young people don't realise that until it's too late. I think some of the other problems are the fact that a lot of kind of like the medical side of, obviously it costs to support people medically. With the NHS already being strange, I think they're a bit more reluctant because, especially in young people, they view it as a thing, well, they're still so young, they're probably going to continue using ketamine. What's the point almost? What's the point in us investing our resources and money and time into supporting these people? Whereas I think sometimes when people are a bit older, there's a bit more faith that they won't relapse, and so they view it as more worthwhile to invest their resources into supporting them and their recovery journey.
How often does drugs play a role in different offences these young people commit?
Really often. So, in my role specifically, if their offence is linked to drugs or alcohol, they have to work with me, as in the court will order them to work with me, and it's they don't have to consent. So for me personally, most of my caseload is made up of people who have drug offences. It can be from as little as like, I say as little, it can be from literally just like possession of cannabis, which is considered quite a low level crime, all the way up to like county lines, and supply and use of crack cocaine or Class A's. But bearing in mind as well, everybody that I work with is under 18. So what I think it's really important to do is view them as victims in their own right. So when you look at some of their offences on paper, it's so easy to think that, you know, that they're kind of like the criminal, and I guess by law they are, but actually most of them nearly all the time are victims, and they've been exploited to either get to a place where they're using drugs or get to a place where they're supplying drugs. And actually, for an under 18-year-old to be involved in any form of drug offence, you have to think, like, why is that? What do they have or what don't they have that other people who aren't? Like, what experience have shaped them and led them to be where they are now? And usually there is a pattern of experiences. Like I said before, they'll be a looked after child. They'll come from a single parent household. They'll come from a background of poverty. So, yeah, I think it's really important to view them as victims as much as you view them as offenders.
And their drug use, does it start before offending, during offending, after offending? Like when is it that it's usually?
It's nearly always before offending. So when you unpack them and their like life story with them, you'll see that their drug use has led to their offending or contributes or forms part of their offences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you find the justice system understands addiction as part of the problem, or does it still lean towards punishment over rehabilitation?
I think my service specifically is really good at acknowledging addiction as a problem that needs to be tackled from all angles. But if you look at the youth justice system as a whole, it's completely based, I think, in like punishment rather than rehabilitation. And actually, punishing people doesn't produce the results that people want to see. Like it just won't. And I get that there needs to be consequences for their actions, but like I said, when you really look at the reasons behind why they've committed their offences, they're rarely just bad people who wanted to do it. There's usually a pattern or a string of events that have led up to that moment.
What kind of support is available for young offenders dealing with addiction?
It depends on what stage they are in their youth justice journey. So, for example, I only work with people who receive orders. So that means that either the crime they've committed isn't considered serious enough to go to court. If they continue to break the law or continue to break the contracts as part of their order, then they would receive a custodial sentence. So for the people that I work with who are on orders, it would be me. I would be the support that they receive. So it would be like one-to-one work. And then from that, there's a whole host of other resources that I can offer. For example, if they need prescribing medication to support them through their recovery journey, I can organise that. We can get them to rehab if we need to. And I can work with them to do the rehab packs and make sure that they're all prepared for that. If you were looking at support from after their order, so if they received a custodial sentence, I actually think that that's a lot less considering of their specific situation, because it's quite generalised. A lot of people go into prison or they get their custodial sentences, and the prison doesn't necessarily recognise that although it's illegal, they're still addicted to a substance, and to like completely deprive someone of that without having kind of like a structured reduction is actually, I think, really unethical. And that's what some of the people who get custodial sentences experience, or they experience delays in like the medication that they were on before. And it's medication that's really crucial to their recovery journey, and they're not getting it as and when they need it. So in summary, most of the support comes from me, and then from me I can go on and offer different resources that may support them throughout their recovery journey.
So how many one-to-ones do you, like when someone comes to you, you have a sit-down meeting with them to meet them, how long does that journey last? It
really depends on the substance. So for example, I do a lot of brief interventions for cannabis, which is essentially where someone says, do you know what, or the court says, you can have a session with the drug and alcohol worker, me, and I will offer them what we call education and harm minimisation. So it will just be a brief session on the effects of cannabis. And I usually just say to them, look, you know, you're at an age clearly where you can make your own decisions. Even if the law doesn't say that, they will make their own decisions. And I guess my job is to make sure they have all the information to make an informed decision. If at the end of that session they go, yeah, well, I'm still going to do this, then they're doing that knowing all the risks. Equally with, I guess, like harder substances, the work tends to be a bit more extended, just because there's more to cover. And usually people who use harder substances want to actually reduce, and that takes time. So naturally the course of time that I work with them will be longer. But it all depends on what their goals are. So I never go in with like a preconceived idea of what we're going to be working towards. I kind of always just let them lead that. And if they say, like, I don't really want to reduce, then my work will probably just be 1 or 2 sessions. And if they actually want to reduce and make changes to their substance use, then that's where I would work for someone for months. I'm currently working with someone who has been open to the service for 4 years. So that just gives you an idea of the timescales I can work with someone who's so varied.
I know that you referred some people to UKAT's Banbury Lodge. What goes into picking a rehab? When you're sending someone to rehab, is it based on location? Is it based off of what's the right fit for them? What kind of goes into that decision making of sending someone to rehab?
So usually when someone goes to rehab, we present them with a list of options and kind of like a brief synopsis on what each rehab offers. So like obviously some are rooted more in like religion, some adopt a more therapeutic approach, and then they'll pick a rehab or they pick their top 5 rehabs. The problem comes when they're under 18, and because it is quite rare to have an under 18 admitted to rehab, there's not many options. So usually they go straight to Banbury Lodge if they're under 18. Because it is one of the few rehabs that offers what under 18s need. But yeah, ideally we would present them with a list of options and they'd choose from there.
How do young people you refer usually respond to the idea of going into a residential setting for help?
Well, we would only ever explore the option of rehab with someone if they wanted it. And I guess sometimes we would suggest it, but it would never get to the stage where we're prepping them for rehab, doing rehab packs, getting them to talk to the social worker who deals with rehab if they didn't want it. And actually, for rehab to be truly effective, it has to come from that person. Otherwise, it's a waste of money. And if you force people to go to rehab, all you'll find is they'll leave early, or they'll complete their time and take nothing from it, because in order for you to receive the information and the resources and the help that rehabs have to offer, you have to be in a position where you're ready to engage with it and receive it. So usually they take quite well to it because they want it.
Why is it that you send people to Banbury Lodge and not other rehabs?
I think Banbury Lodge is top choice for a lot of all our under 18s, because it's one of the few rehabs that actually offer a space to under 18s. Because rehabs focus so much on adulthood and adults and supporting them, there's not that many options for under 18s, and so if Banbury Lodge will accept them, we'll be sending them there. I think that Banbury Lodge is doing the work that needs to be reflected across the entire rehab world. There needs to be more options, and also more options that accommodate for a different range of factors. So I guess Banbury Lodge is taking on a lot of different needs, and how can you ensure that one rehab is able to support the needs of each individual person? Usually with over 18s, they'll have an option so they can pick the one that best suits their needs, whereas with under 18s, they don't really get to do that. But it also places a lot of pressure, I guess, on Banbury Lodge, because they have to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach almost, because they get such a range of needs being sent to the rehab, because they're one of the few rehabs that offer a place to under 18s.
What tends to work best when helping young people open up about their substance use?
I honestly think one of, if not the most important thing you can do when supporting young people, especially through substance use, is rapport building. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming for young people to open up and speak about something with so much stigma. If you're able to build that rapport, which young people are really aware of actually when you're just like a professional who doesn't care, they can really pick up on that. If you're able to build that rapport, you kind of have a really good foundation to work on before you begin, I don't want to say more meaningful work, but I guess more specific work linked to substance use. I think that you need to create an environment and a space where young people feel safe and as though they won't be judged to speak about their substance use. Bearing in mind as well, I call it professional fatigue, but a lot of young people, by the time they get to work with me, they have been through the process. They have worked with so many professionals. They've worked with so many people who maybe don't understand what it's like to be in their position. And I never will be able to fully understand either, but I like to think that I make a good attempt at trying. So I think rapport building is the most important thing to consider when working with young people and substances.
Do you think it also helps that you're younger? Do you think they respond better to you as a young person as well?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think a lot of within substance there's a lot of slang as well that I guess older professionals they're not really aware of. When you see people who A, kind of speak like you, B, share very similar interests to you in terms of music, know what the street names are for substances, they just feel more seen. They feel like they can relate to you more. And then almost without you even trying, you naturally build that relationship because you just feel connected or more connected to people that you have things in common with. Also, you just kind of have to place yourself in their shoes. If you're like a most people I work with are 16-year-old males, and you're trying to talk to an older bald male about your substance use who doesn't even know what weed is because he knows that it's cannabis. You aren't going to feel, I guess, safe to open up to that person and share your experiences. But it's also really good because where I can pick up on like street names and I guess like more slang terms, I'm able to pick up when they're like, I guess when they're in a position that might compromise their safety or something like that. Whereas another worker might hear that and not even think to process or safeguard that because they don't actually know what it means.
Do you think specialist treatment like what we offer can break the cycle more effectively than community-based programs alone?
I feel like that question, it's so dependent on that specific person's individual factors. We would always opt for a community detox over rehab first. Firstly, because if I'm being frank, it's cheaper. But secondly, it equips them with the skills that they need to live and deal with their substance use, like in a realistic way. What I mean by that is, obviously, when you send someone to rehab, they're in a rehab for like a minimum of 28 days. So they're in this rehab, they're away from all their problems, away from the realities of their real life. So they're doing really well in that specific setting, but actually, as soon as you place them back into the environment that they were in before, they might struggle a bit more. Whereas when you do community-based work, I guess you teach them more to deal with their substance and their problems within the context that they're going to be dealing with it in, if that makes sense. But that being said, for some people, a community-based detox or community work just isn't intense enough for the support that they need. And where rehab comes in is when people do need that more specialised, targeted and intense support. And actually for some people, in order for them to make meaningful change, they need to be removed from their environment. So I think with that question, it really just depends on the circumstances of the person and what resources and people and support they have available to them, if any.
Do you think that rehabilitation in young people is kind of like, I don't want to say diminished, but put back because of their peers? Like, have you ever worked with someone where you've worked through all of their substance abuse issues and they seem like they're going on a good track, and then they go out with their friends and then they relapse or they go back to it because they're influenced by their peers?
All the time, but I think it's less of a thing to do with like peer influence and more to do with the fact that at that point now they have an addiction. And so usually as well, the people that they surround themselves with use substances or have an addiction as well. And it's like they'll be okay for as long as they're not around those peers, but as soon as they get with those peers, they're in that situation which triggers their use, or someone will have a substance that they're addicted to. And so it makes it difficult for them to say no. So a lot of my work involves like contingency planning, where we will sometimes like literally come up with scripts of what you're going to say when your friend offers you Coke, or how you're going to a pre-prepared text to send when your friend says, do you want to come out tonight? Because you know that actually being at the pub with your mates triggers your use. Also, I always encourage people, if they feel comfortable to share what their goals are surrounding their substance use with people around them. And if those people love and care about you, they wouldn't place you in a position where you're going to compromise that. Actually, if you say, by the way, to your friends, I'm really trying to not use ketamine anymore, please don't bring it around me, or please don't offer it to me, then hopefully they can support that person moving forward in their own substance use as well. So I guess to answer your question more specifically, it usually starts off as peer influence, and that's their kind of like gateway to that substance. But by the point they get to me, they're in addiction, and actually the presence of friends wouldn't really change that. And then sometimes if they feel comfortable to share, their friends can actually have a really positive influence on their recovery journey. And we know that friendships, employment, are like some of the key factors to a good recovery journey, or education.
Do you think that the scripts tend to work with the people? Do they actually follow that?
Some of them definitely do. Some of them definitely don't use the scripts. But for the ones that do, I think it's really good because it means they don't have to think about it in the moment. They have this, like sometimes it will literally just be saved to their notes, And they'll have this pre-prepared text and they just have to press send without thinking about it. Another thing is we want to always like try and introduce or remove, and what I say introduce and remove obstacles to substance use, because you either want to make it harder for you to access that substance, whether that's removing the money from your bank account. So actually when you want to go and pick up, you have to ask someone to transfer you the money, you then have to go to the cash point, you then have to pick it up. That's all thinking time. So that's all time that you give yourself to think, actually, do I need to do this? When I say remove obstacles, I mean things like having a pre-prepared text. So you don't have to think about what you're going to send, you can just send it.
Are there any success stories that remind you of why your work is so important?
Like, not to toot my own horn, but I feel like every day there's small success stories that remind you why it's important. One thing that really stands out is like someone who's been open to our service for coming up to 4 years now, and they were using like literally everything under the sun: cocaine, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and they've been open to service since they were 13. They were really heavily involved with county lines. They got placed in an order, did some work with me and the Youth Justice Service. They now aren't involved in a criminal lifestyle by way of county lines, but they're actually abstinent as well from all substances except from cannabis. So they've done really well. And actually, that's a really good way of how your work has catalysed lifelong positive change that I hope that they'll carry forward.
From where you're standing, what trends in drug use worry you the most right now?
Ketamine, and also the just general kind of more relaxed approach to cannabis. I'll start with ketamine. Obviously, we've touched on this before, but there's been such a rise in ketamine and more problematic use with ketamine. I think that's like the key part. Ketamine use that is causing people to need bladder transplants, and actually because of their age are not able to access the support that ideally we'd get for them. And people just view ketamine as like a really recreational drug with no long-term physical health consequences. And when I say cannabis, what I mean by that is people treat cannabis as almost not even really like a drug. And I think the most alarming things with cannabis are like the impact it can have on your mental health. We see a lot of young people sectioned for drug-induced psychosis from usually cannabis, and because it's such young people that are using this, in like their age, their brains aren't able to withstand the negative effects that can come from cannabis, but also they're simply just not aware of it. So those are I think what we'll see, the two trends that are worrying me most is an increase in problematic ketamine use and more negative mental health effects stemming from cannabis.
Do you think we're doing enough as a society to protect and educate young people about addiction?
No. We're definitely not doing it as much because there's still such a stigma around it that people aren't able or don't feel able to access the support that they need. There's also just not enough funding going into it, and actually a lot of the funding, because it's so scarce, a lot of the funding comes into the point when the problem's already happened. Actually, if we tried to put some of that into preventing the problem, then I think we'd see a lot less people going through the recovery journey, because it wouldn't even necessarily get to that stage. But also, as I've keep saying, it's such a holistic approach. Like, you really need to adopt such a holistic approach to substances. And if we can put funding or support into the things that trigger substance use, then maybe we'd see less people again coming through the recovery journey. What I mean by that is things like housing, placing more funding into keeping people in education and providing appropriate educational settings, support and support into looking into the factors that cause people to offend to begin with. Things like county lines. Why do people go into county lines and then get exposed to a drug using lifestyle and then end up being someone who is addicted to a substance? So yeah, we're not doing enough, but it's also such a big problem to tackle that I'm not even sure where we would begin. But yeah, I think stigma probably costs more financially than people think Like, actually, if we were able to remove the stigma, they'd feel more able to access support earlier on, and then the problems wouldn't develop into something much bigger.
When people come to you, it's obviously if they have offended, then it's usually court ordered. Do you have any people that can the youth self-refer them? Or is it family members? Like, is it family members that come to you, or is it themselves just wanting help and coming to you and asking for help? How is it usually that people go down the route of getting help through your company?
So, like, for the wider CGL service, you can make self-referrals, you can get referrals from professionals. Mostly we see referrals from professionals and then self-referrals. But for my role specifically, most of them are court ordered to, but you do get the odd ones who don't have to do it. So there's a few instances. You get the odd people that don't have to work with CGL, but they choose to because they think it's something that's going to benefit them. And they're usually the people that I work with the longest, which is no surprise there because they want to do it. Yeah, so usually the court will order a certain number of sessions. And at the end of those sessions, I'll always say, right, you've done your mandated sessions now. Do you want to continue working with me? And most people do say yes, which tells me that actually, although they didn't want to maybe work the service at the beginning, they've realised now actually how beneficial it is or can be to their recovery journey. So yeah.
If you could change one thing about how the system handles young offenders struggling with drugs, what would it be?
To acknowledge them as victims in their own right, because most of the time they are. And actually, nobody struggles with addiction or turns to addiction because they want to. There's so many factors usually underlying that. So it's to consider them as victims of whatever, whether that's victims of other crimes, whether that's victims of poverty, whether that's victims of county lines, like literally anything. Just if you can adopt that approach in your work, I think that's when you'll actually be able to make more change rather than going in with an approach of they need to be punished or it's their fault.
Do you have any stories that you would like to share?
Yeah, there's this one story that I have of someone I was working with, and I think it really highlights the extent of addiction and how people and their families become victims of their own addiction, but in a way that they don't want it to become. So, for example, this young person that I was working with was 17 and he was struggling with cocaine use. And what had happened is he'd wrapped up a really large debt to a gang. And then through another young person I was working with, I found out that this gang now had his address and had intentions to harm his mum and his family. So I then had to inform the police, and actually in the end, they did a welfare check and that family moved from their home to Dubai, where they had family living. Now, obviously at first, if you're not in the addiction world or understand fully how it works, you might think, well, you know, that young person did that to his family. But actually what I think it shows is how addiction just takes over, and no one willingly places themselves in that position. No one wants to end up like that. And I think it's just a story that shows how extreme addiction can become.
What are the signs that parents can look out for if they're worried that their child is taking drugs, like addicted to the drugs that they're taking? Any signs to look out for?
Firstly, becoming, I think, withdrawn from their family, because usually what that might indicate is that doing things to get money, or if you notice that they're not at home more, they might be leaving the house to use their substance. Secondly, just general difference in presentation, whether that's their behaviour, whether it's how they present in terms of like hygiene, whether that's how they interact with you. Drug paraphernalia that they're not able to explain. Becoming a bit more secretive with their phone, leaving the house late at night. These are all things that don't always, but sometimes indicate that someone is struggling a bit more with their substance use. But usually, if someone's at the point of addiction, especially when they're a young person and depend a bit more on family or still live at home, it's easier, not easy, but easier to pick up.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
If you are worried about someone who is struggling with addiction, or you yourself are worried about your substance use, please reach out, because there is help out there and there's people like me who want to support you.